My name is Trinity Hale. I'm 41 years old. I serve in a place that doesn't officially exist doing work. No one gets credit for under a name that no longer appears in military databases. And I never planned on coming back. But families have gravity, the kind that drags you down when you've spent your life trying to float above it. They told everyone I failed, said I cracked under pressure, couldn't handle the weight of command, that I walked away without a fight. I let them say it. I let them all believe it. Until last Thursday. Fort Brooks was blistering that morning. The ceremony was held in Hangar 9, a cavernous, echo-heavy space where the air always tasted like machine oil and sunburnt metal. Rows of families filled the folding chairs, mothers adjusting collars, officers straightening ribbons, toddlers squirming in itchy formal wear. I arrived late on purpose. My name wasn't on the list. I entered through the civilian gate with a visitor badge flipped backward on my belt. No one stopped me. That's the trick walk, like you're supposed to be there, and most people won't question it. Ryan was at the center, my younger brother, standing on the platform, posture immaculate, smile subdued. Not nervous, just precise. He was getting his commission as lieutenant commander, the golden boy, the one who followed the rulebook all the way into our father's shadow, Commander Russ Hale. My father stood proudly at the front row, jaw clenched like he was holding in an entire speech about legacy. My mother sat beside him, dressed in navy blue heels, two tight hands folded like she was trying to will herself invisible. They didn't know I was there. I stood against the back wall near the fire exit behind a row of unfamiliar officers and the scent of burnt coffee. I hadn't worn a uniform in a decade. Just black slacks, a windbreaker, hair pulled back. Nothing to draw attention. But attention found me anyway. The moment happened fast, too fast for people to process. Master Chief Vernon Tate walked in just as the national anthem faded. Retired but unmistakable. Broad-shouldered, still sharp, despite the silver in his beard. He used to command my father's SEAL team. I hadn't seen him since I was 25. His gaze swept the room like a laser. Then it stopped. On me. At first I thought I'd imagined it. But no. His stare didn't move. And then, without hesitation, he walked straight across the room past rows of dress whites and confused glances. Every step pulled oxygen from the room. I didn't move. I didn't blink. Then at exactly 5 feet away, he stopped. Back straight. Chin up. And he saluted. A full, deliberate salute. His voice was gravel and steel. "General Hale, ma'am." The base went silent. Someone dropped a phone. A child stopped mid-fidget. A cough was cut short halfway through. You could feel it, the tension folding in on itself like a lung that forgot how to breathe. Ryan turned his head slowly, his mouth parted, but no words came out. My father stiffened, not in pride, in disbelief. My mother raised a shaking hand to her chest. Every eye turned to me. I held my ground. I returned the salute, not fully, just enough to acknowledge. "At ease, Chief. I'm off duty." He nodded. That was it. He turned and walked back like he'd only come across the room to deliver a memo. But the damage was done. The entire hangar now knew exactly who I was, and that I hadn't failed. The strange thing about silence is how loud it gets when you're the reason for it. They didn't whisper right away. People just stared. The ceremony continued in technicality, but no one was watching the stage anymore. Their faces changed first. The lieutenant giving the speech began to stumble over his words. The photographer hesitated to take the next shot. Officers glanced toward their superiors, as if waiting for anyone to explain what they had just seen. Ryan tried to resume the program, but his voice lacked conviction now. It cracked just slightly when he introduced the guest dignitaries. I watched him. He didn't look at me again, but his stance changed. Shoulders tighter, feet shifting like he suddenly forgot how to stand. My father didn't move at all. He kept his eyes forward, chin tilted with a kind of stubborn disbelief. But my mother turned in her seat, slowly. Her eyes met mine for just a second, and then dropped to the floor. That second told me everything. I didn't need to say a word. He had already said it for me. I walked out before the applause began. Not because I couldn't stomach it, but because I didn't need it. I'd already received the only recognition that mattered. Outside, the sun felt heavier than it should. My breath came slow and steady. My hands didn't shake. There's a kind of clarity that only comes after the truth lands in a room full of people who spent years pretending it never existed. I didn't go to my car right away. I walked the perimeter of the hangar, past the military vehicles, past the old field cannons polished for display, past the flags whipping against the metal fencing. The wind hit my face and felt clean. Inside that building, the story of Trinity Hale had just been rewritten without me opening my mouth. For 10 years, they told a version that made them comfortable. That made my father the strong one. That made Ryan the proud one. That made me the mistake. But one salute, just one, fractured the lie. Not by force, not by confrontation, just by being true. And now they all had to decide what to do with that truth. I didn't walk faster. I didn't hide. Because I wasn't the one who should feel small. For the first time in years, I felt tall. Not because of rank, but because someone who knew exactly who I was finally said it out loud. And the whole base heard him. I was 25 when it happened. The operation was supposed to be a routine joint training exercise. Army, Navy, and civilian contractors. Simulated infiltration. Risk assessment. Nothing classified. Nothing volatile. Until it wasn't. 3 hours into the exercise, my team received a real-time signal conflict. It looked like a glitch in the comms relay, but I knew better. The pattern didn't match training interference. It mirrored a live data breach, slow, deliberate, quiet. Someone was listening. I flagged it immediately. Sent an internal report through the encrypted channel, tagged it as a potential vulnerability compromise. Not red alert, but high priority. No response. 10 minutes later, I got pulled from my post. They said my instincts were too reactive, that I was distracting the unit from mission cohesion. I was benched for the remainder of the exercise. Then quietly, I was called into a review. The room was small, fluorescent lights that buzzed too loud. A single fan spinning air that never moved. 2 officers I didn't know. 1 admin rep. A clipboard with nothing on the table but my name. They asked if I understood the weight of my accusation. I said it wasn't an accusation. It was data. They said it was paranoia, that I misread noise as threat, that I jeopardized the flow of the exercise. When I mentioned the signal signature again, one of them leaned forward and said, "You really think you're the only one who knows how to read a pattern?" The next document handed to me was a formal withdrawal agreement. Time to reflect, they called it. Step back before escalation. And the final blow came when I saw the signature line. Russell Hale, my father. He'd already signed. No conversation, no confrontation. Just ink and institutional silence. The paperwork said I'd asked for personal leave, that I needed space, that I'd voluntarily withdrawn, but I hadn't. They erased me. Officially, I'd left due to performance misalignment. Unofficially, they buried a report. The breach was real. Weeks later, another officer flagged the same pattern. This time, they traced it to a foreign contractor embedded inside the civilian logistics team. By then, it was too late. The damage had been contained, but the cover-up stayed sealed. My name never got restored. No update. No apology. I didn't fight back. Not because they were right. Because I realized fighting would only give them more ammo. And because I knew exactly how many people were involved in making sure the file that proved I was right never officially existed. I walked out of that building with no rank, no orders, no farewell. Just a duffel bag, a USB drive, with a copy of the raw data, and a spine that no longer bent when people told me to sit down. The first time I walked into Division Echo's satellite facility, it didn't even have a sign on the door. It looked like an abandoned tax office. Beige carpet, stale air, coffee machine blinking 12 hours since probably 2006. I was met by a woman in civilian clothes, who introduced herself only as Harper. No rank, no title, just Harper. She slid a folder across the table and said, "We don't do medals here, we do impact. If you need your name on a wall, turn around now." I didn't. The file contained a single form. Conditional agreement. No federal record. No public assignments. Everything would be buried under project code names and rotating proxies. I signed. They didn't ask for a resume. They already had it. Division Echo doesn't exist, not on any surface-level government registry. It's a cross-branch intelligence program for patterns too subtle, too dangerous, or too politically inconvenient for the standard chain of command. Leaks, internal surveillance, institutional rot. They don't operate with brass, they operate with evidence. My first 6 months were quiet. I didn't touch the field. I sat in windowless rooms combing through pattern anomalies, watching hours of footage linking threads no one else had time to examine. It was mind-numbing and brutal, but it made sense. No expectations, no uniforms, no one asking who I was related to, no one saluting, just results. Some nights I left with a headache so deep I forgot my own name, but the cases started resolving. Quiet shifts, internal corrections, people reassigned or removed not by scandal, but by spreadsheets. I wasn't on the headlines, I was on the margin notes, the ones that change everything without a sound. That was how I learned the power of quiet. My name stayed off documents. I didn't vote, I didn't renew licenses. My medical file was reduced to blood type and reaction triggers. I became someone no one could trace. And for years I didn't need to be traced. Until I saw the announcement. Ryan Hale, Lieutenant Commander. Ceremony at Fort Brooks. Family invited. I didn't RSVP. I didn't even know why I was going. But I packed a small bag, ironed my slacks, slid my visitor badge into a side pouch, and drove 5 hours without music. And when I walked into that hangar, I wasn't there to interrupt. I was there to witness. I didn't expect Vernon Tate to see me. I didn't expect a salute. But when he gave it, he didn't just acknowledge my rank. He acknowledged that everything they'd said about me for 10 years was a lie, and that made everything that followed inevitable. I didn't write a note. I didn't sign my name. I didn't even wait to see if he'd be home. I just left the drive at his door, a black USB no label inside a plain craft envelope sealed once along the flap. I tucked it beneath the edge of the welcome mat on the 3rd step of Ryan's on-base duplex, just far enough in that someone might miss it, unless they were looking for it. I knew he'd find it. Military men don't walk over things without checking for tripwires. It wasn't spite, it wasn't an ambush. It was a courtesy. That drive contained the original incident report from 10 years ago, the unredacted version that never made it past internal routing. I'd stored it under layers of scrambled metadata, renamed it a dozen times, disguised it as drone telemetry, embedded it in a weather modeling folder no one but me would bother opening. And now it was his. Inside the archive were 4 documents. First, my initial breach alert filed in real time during the operation. Second, the scrubbed version, the one they submitted to Joint Command with 3 critical lines altered, and my status changed from recommended retention to insubordinate liability. Third, a metadata trail showing who accessed and edited the report. Fourth, my father's digital signature. That was the one that mattered. That was the line that shattered everything. Russell Hale hadn't just endorsed the changes, he'd authorized them. 2 days after the op, one day before I was pulled from the post. The file had his full security hash time-stamped and locked. No room for interpretation, no plausible deniability. He didn't just stand by while I was erased. He pressed the delete key himself, and he never said a word. He let me walk out of that compound with a fabricated failure pinned to my record like a scarlet letter stitched in grayscale. He let our relatives repeat it at holidays. He let my mother change the subject every time someone brought me up. He let Ryan grow into a man who thought I'd cracked under pressure. I didn't send the drive out of vengeance. I sent it because it was time. Time for Ryan to stop worshipping an edited version of our father. Time for him to see the cost of silence. Time for him to understand why I didn't fight back the way they expected. Because the truth isn't always loud. Sometimes it arrives in silence, like a file, on your doorstep. No return address. The drive didn't contain a single audio message. No preamble, no defense, no explanation. I wanted the facts to stand alone, because if he couldn't believe them without my voice, then my voice never mattered to begin with. Still, I thought about the moment he'd pick it up. Would he recognize the weight before opening it? Would he hesitate, sensing something unspoken in its blank presentation? Or would he plug it in with the same mechanical detachment we'd both been trained to use on unknowns? I pictured him at his desk uniform, still half on boots kicked under the chair screen, flickering in the dark. I saw the change happen on his face, not suddenly, but slowly. Like fog lifting from terrain you didn't know was steep. I knew it would hit him hard, but not because of what was done to me, because of who did it. People like Ryan spend their whole lives aiming at an image, trying to become the ideal reflection of someone who taught them how to stand, how to salute, how to breathe in formation. And the moment you learn that image was built on the suppression of someone else's truth, it breaks something deeper than pride. It breaks faith. But faith deserves to break when it's built on lies. That's what the drive was, not a strike, a mirror. And once you look into a mirror like that, you can't unsee it. I didn't wait for him to call. I didn't hover over my secure line. I didn't pace. I just went home, made tea, sat in the quiet, and let the facts speak for themselves. He didn't knock. The buzzer sounded just once, and by the time I reached the door, he was already standing there. Jaw clenched, eyes stormed over, one hand still curled into a fist at his side. Ryan always had this way of holding himself like a soldier even when he was off duty. That posture you carry long after they stop drilling it into you. But right now his shoulders were coiled tight, not in control, but in recoil. I opened the door, said nothing, stepped aside. He walked in like he'd rehearsed it. I closed the door and waited. He didn't sit. He didn't look around. His eyes stayed on me, hard and confused and brittle, like he didn't know whether to shout or shut down. 3 seconds passed. Then he spoke. You let me believe it for 10 years. His voice wasn't raised, but it scraped. I didn't flinch. He kept going. 10 years, Trinity. I've defended him. I've quoted him. I modeled myself after the same man who he broke off, like even finishing the thought would splinter something permanent. I crossed my arms, not in defiance, in anchoring, and he blinked. And you never said anything. Not a word. Not to Mom. Not to me. You disappeared. You just let the lie settle. I took a slow breath. Measured. Clean. Did you ever ask? The silence came fast. His mouth opened then shut. He looked away for the first time. Not in shame. In the raw discomfort of a man being peeled open. He dropped onto the edge of my couch like gravity had betrayed him. He stopped. I didn't know there was something to ask. I didn't sit. I stood still in the same place I'd stood when I walked out of the system a decade ago. You knew I didn't fight it. You knew I didn't argue, didn't make a scene. You thought that meant I was guilty. He looked up. What was I supposed to think? That maybe silence doesn't always mean surrender. I walked to the window. The street outside was empty. A dog barked 2 houses over. Normal sounds. They felt louder than him. You grew up with the same man I did, I said. You know how he taught us to see strength. Obedience, control, no emotion, no questioning. He said nothing. And you also know what happens when someone breaks that pattern. I turned back to him. He didn't just let it happen, Ryan. He made it happen. He didn't defend me because doing so would have meant admitting his command allowed a breach. He chose image over truth, protocol over blood. His fingers laced together tightly like he needed something to hold that wasn't mine. I read the report, he whispered. I nodded. And I don't recognize that man. Good. He looked up sharply. I kept my voice even. Because now you're seeing him. Not the version who gave speeches at the academy. The version who signed away his daughter's future because it was cleaner. Ryan leaned back, rubbing his hands over his face. Do you think he regrets it? Does it matter? He didn't answer. I walked over, sat across from him, not too close. Not far. You came with questions, I said. You found answers. He dropped his hands. Yeah, he murmured. But I didn't come just for answers. I raised an eyebrow. I came because I needed to know if you hated me for not knowing. My chest tightened briefly, quietly. I let a beat pass before speaking. I don't hate you, Ryan. I never did. He exhaled. I hated the silence. His eyes welled, no tears, just wait. I stood again, walked to the kitchen, poured 2 glasses of water, set one beside him, sat down again. He took it, holding it with both hands like he needed something solid. What do I do now, he asked. I didn't answer right away, because that wasn't a tactical question. That was a reckoning. And reckoning, I've learned, can't be rushed. It can only be lived. So I said the only thing that mattered. You start by not pretending anymore. He nodded. Once. Slow. And drank. The night after Ryan left, I didn't sleep. Not out of anxiety, not even anger. Just a kind of stillness that meant something in my brain had already started moving ahead of me. It happens that way sometimes. My thoughts settle quietly while my hands begin digging. By midnight, I was logged into the archive node I hadn't touched in over a year. Division Echo's shadow servers don't light up unless you know how to request access without leaving a trail. I wasn't just checking the file again, I was checking the code behind it. The report Ryan read, the one I'd left on his doorstep, was damning enough. But I needed to know if there was more, not just a signature. I wanted to know who typed the lie. The metadata revealed a chain of edits, timestamps, clearance hashes, routing patterns, the kind of digital fingerprints most people never see because they don't know where to look. I did, and there it was, one line buried deep inside the log chain. At first it looked routine, just a time-stamped edit from a restricted terminal. But when I expanded the hash signature, it hit me like ice down my spine. It wasn't just my father's authorization, it was his keystrokes. The raw activity showed that he didn't merely sign off on a modified version written by someone else. He'd made the changes himself. He manually deleted the clause that described the breach I flagged, removed the sentence about external interference, inserted a line about unauthorized escalation of threat protocol, replaced the phrase pattern match indicative of hostile compromise with false positive misreading of routine comms variants. Each of those edits was deliberate, precise, controlled, not oversight, not bureaucratic laziness, intent. He didn't just let me fall. He built the ground I fell through. I stared at the log trail for 10 full minutes. The room around me faded to nothing. Just the hum of the terminal and the slow, methodical pulse of someone who just saw a body unburied. Because that's what this was. I wasn't just cut loose, I was buried. And the man holding the shovel wore my last name. In the bottom half of the metadata trail, there was a root record. It showed who else accessed the report post-edit. 2 flags popped. One from a secure AirOps channel, likely routine audit. The second from a senior command desk tied to Admiral Curtis LeClaire, my father's longtime superior. The man whose oversight should have been questioned after my breach alert. Instead, he was the reason the alert vanished. Because had my report gone through untouched, it would have exposed not just a single breach, but a network of contractor vulnerabilities routed through LeClaire's approved vendors. It was never about me. It was about what my presence in the report would have illuminated: a systemic flaw, a command failure. And in that kind of world, there's only one solution: sacrifice the piece that draws too much light. So they made me the problem. And my father made sure it stuck. The phrase I kept hearing in my head wasn't one I'd said aloud in years. He protected his superior by erasing his daughter. I sat back in my chair, eyes burning, not from tears, but from focus too sharp for blinking. There's a moment in every operative's life when the data becomes more personal than the mission. This was mine. The irony was vicious. I'd spent 10 years in Division Echo tracking down cover-ups, silent manipulations, whispered redirects in the chain of command. I'd filed quiet resolutions against powerful men who thought the system would keep them safe. And all this time, the first one to ever do it to me was in my own house, at my dinner table, teaching me how to polish boots while drafting my erasure behind closed doors. I could have screamed. I could have thrown something. Instead, I opened a blank field note and typed one word into the title bar: exhume. I didn't press save. Not yet. I just stared at it. Because before I brought this to anyone, before I put it on a timeline or built a case file, I needed to understand one thing fully. This wasn't about revenge. It never was. It was about clarity. Because if I didn't confront this, if I let it live in the margins, then I was just another ghost they successfully buried. And I've spent enough time in the dark. It was time to bring the file into the light. I remember the conversation, not because it was loud. Not because it was cruel, but because it was calm, too calm. It was the last week before I signed the withdrawal papers. My name was still technically on the active roster. I hadn't been reassigned. I hadn't been reprimanded publicly. Everything was under review, but the silence said more than the paperwork did. I was told to meet him in a side office, not on base, but in the old building behind the administrative wing, the kind they use for overflow interviews and internal check-ins. No flags on the wall, just beige paint and a single clock that ticked too loud. He was already seated when I walked in. Russell Hale, my father, not in uniform, but not casual either. Slacks pressed, shirt tucked, face unreadable. He didn't look up at first, just flipped through a folder. My folder. I stood still, waited for protocol. There wasn't one. Finally, he spoke. "You're going to be offered voluntary withdrawal." I didn't move. "I know," I said. He looked at me then. Sharp, not disappointed, analytical. "You should take it." That was the part that froze the air, not the offer, the instruction. He wasn't asking. He was telling me to step back, to disappear, to play the role of the quiet daughter who understood when to stop being inconvenient. I swallowed the heat rising in my chest. "I flagged a breach," I said evenly. "I followed protocol." He nodded once. "Maybe. But your insistence made command look weak, made procedures look fragile. They are fragile if they can't stand up to a threat. That's not your call to make." He said it like he was reading a checklist. Then he leaned forward slightly. "There's no court-martial, no public black mark. They're offering you a clean exit, with your record intact. Take it." My jaw locked. "And what happens to the truth?" His fingers tapped the folder. "That's not your mission anymore." I stared at him. I remember wondering if he believed it, if he actually thought he was protecting something noble, or if he just didn't want the headlines. "Is this about me?" I asked, "or is this about your reputation?" He didn't blink. Both. That honesty should have been jarring. It wasn't. Because I knew. I always knew. Russ Hale cared about image the way other men cared about blood pressure, constantly, quietly, obsessively. He was the kind of officer who turned every setback into a training anecdote, the kind who built a legacy not just on operations but on how they were remembered. And I had threatened the narrative, not by failing but by succeeding in a way that exposed a lie. A daughter who challenged the system was a liability, but a daughter who left voluntarily, that was manageable. That was clean. That was protectable. For him. Not for me. Still, I didn't walk out. I sat down across from him and asked the question I hadn't asked since I was 10 years old. "Do you believe I'm wrong?" He hesitated. Just long enough. And that told me everything. Then he said, "I believe the institution is bigger than the individual." There it was. Not an answer. A doctrine. He stood, closed the file, didn't offer a handshake. "You'll get the paperwork by Friday." Then he left. I sat there for 10 more minutes, listening to the tick of the clock and the hum of an old vending machine 2 halls down. I thought about all the things I could say, all the ways I could scream, but screaming wasn't the language he understood. Silence was, so I signed the withdrawal 2 days later. No appeals, no calls, no press, just one quiet departure wrapped in the illusion of dignity. For the good of the program, for the name I carried, for the man they saluted, not the one who raised me, but the one who needed me gone to stay standing. He waited for me in the officer's lot. The sun hadn't fully set yet. The last of the daylight pulled gold across the asphalt, and I saw his silhouette leaning on the hood of a black government-issued SUV. Arms crossed, jacket still zipped. Like the cold had settled in early. I almost didn't stop. I could have kept walking. Let him see the back of my uniform and the weight I carried, but I didn't. Not because I owed him anything, but because the silence between us had grown so large it started to echo. So I stopped 3 feet away. "Colonel Hale," I said. "General," he answered. It wasn't sarcasm, but it wasn't warmth either. Just a precise acknowledgement of fact. "I suppose you came to talk," he added. I didn't correct him. I came to look him in the eye. "You knew the truth the whole time," I said. "You read the full report. You saw what happened on the ground." "I did," he said. "And you still signed it." "I did," he said again. My breath stayed level. I've spent the last decade listening to people whisper that I broke under pressure, that I imagined threats that weren't there, that I cost men their confidence. "They weren't wrong about the outcome," he replied. I blinked. Not from surprise, from the chill behind his words. "You mean the outcome where your daughter was sacrificed for the stability of the chain of command?" He didn't flinch. "You weren't sacrificed. You were misaligned. Misaligned." He nodded as if explaining a gear ratio. "You never did take orders the right way. You questioned protocol. You paused to confirm instead of executing. You made decisions like someone playing chess, not war. And when pressure came, you exposed a vulnerability that made others hesitate. You were a risk. I let the word sit between us. Risk. Not failure, not insubordination. Risk. I wasn't a risk to the mission, I said slowly. I was a risk to the narrative. His jaw tensed, just slightly. I kept the machine running, he said. I did what I had to do to maintain cohesion. I studied his face. The lines had deepened. His once firm stare now flickered just slightly, like a man who wasn't used to defending his decisions out loud. Say it, I said. Say you believed what they accused me of. He didn't. Instead, he said, you don't belong in a unit. You don't follow. You lead. But you do it sideways. Quietly, independently. He looked out over the base. And that makes men nervous. There it was. The truth. Buried under institutional words and military logic. Not that I failed, but that I made them uncomfortable, that I made them confront blind spots they didn't want to see, that my existence, my thinking required them to be better than they were ready to be. I took a step closer. You could have said something. You could have told them I was right. I did, he said. I frowned. He clarified. Not in that room, but later, quietly. I restructured protocol based on your report. You fixed the system after you let it erase me, he nodded. That was the deal. Your silence bought change. I felt something sharp rise in my chest. Not anger, something colder, disgust. You let your daughter become a cautionary tale to fix a spreadsheet. He looked back at me. I saved more lives that way than by defending one. It was the logic of command, the arithmetic of compromise, the kind of thinking that carved soldiers into pawns. You don't have to forgive me, he said. But don't pretend you don't understand. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because just then a voice broke the weight in the air. Trinity. I turned. My mother stood a few paces away. Hair pulled back, jacket too thin for the wind. Eyes steady. I saw what happened in that hearing, she said. I wasn't allowed to speak. But I saw it. I tried to read her expression. She looked tired but clear. I thought she continued that if I stayed silent, the damage would be contained. That your father would find a way to make it right. Her gaze shifted to him. He made it efficient, but not right. I felt my throat tighten. She stepped closer. You're not the only one who walked away that day, she said. I blinked. Her words didn't land all at once. They sank in slowly. She wasn't just talking about me. She was talking about herself. All these years I thought I'd been the only one to leave, to carry the burden, but she had too. Quietly, internally. She had stepped back from him, from belief, from the structure she once stood beside. And maybe that's what cracked me the most, not the betrayal, but the knowing that someone else had seen it too, and didn't stop it. I nodded once. No blame, no demand, just a reckoning. Then I turned to leave. Behind me, I heard my father say nothing. Not an apology, not a command, just silence. And for once, I let it stay that way. I hadn't planned to revisit the original hard copy. It was old text stored on a dusty drive I'd backed up from a base server years ago. The metadata wasn't indexed, no name tags, no cross-referencing. But something kept clawing at me. Why was the signature on my report so clean, so seamless? So practiced. It wasn't until I ran a forensic overlay pixel density pressure analysis cadence curves that the anomaly showed itself. Not the name, the stroke pattern. It didn't match mine. Someone had copied my writing. I traced it back, through archived signatures, through transfer orders, and finally through an internal memo attached to a completely unrelated field report. Second Lieutenant Drew Marston. The name clicked. He'd been a rising star, straight-laced, smart, idealistic to a fault. My father once called him a natural at navigating bureaucracy. Translation, he knew when to follow and when to vanish behind protocol. And I remembered something else. He was mentored by my father, handpicked, groomed. He hadn't just signed that false report in my name. He'd been in the room when the edits were made, and someone gave him the order. That's when I combed through the command logs, hidden beneath the server's simulation caches. It wasn't straightforward. But there it was, an internal routing code embedded into a scheduling request. The final authorization didn't come from my father. It came from Master Chief Vernon Tate, the same man who'd saluted me in front of the entire base, who used the word general loud enough to shake a parade ground, the same man who stood beside my father the day I disappeared from record. He'd signed off on the silence. He had been the final stamp on a decision that reshaped my life, and now he was the one dragging it all back into the light. I kept replaying that moment, not the one from 10 years ago, but the one at Ryan's ceremony when Vernon Tate cut through the crowd, his shoulders rigid, his walk deliberate, every step pulling the air tighter around him. He stopped in front of me just like that day. But this time he didn't look through me. He saw me. "General," he said. And then he saluted. It wasn't protocol. It wasn't theater. It was confession. The kind that doesn't use words. The kind men like him never learned to say out loud. For years I thought I'd been erased because I was weak, or unpredictable, or too difficult to fit into a box. But it wasn't that. It was because men like him believed that protecting the institution mattered more than protecting the truth. Until they couldn't carry it anymore. The salute wasn't a recognition of rank. It was an act of reparation, and I saw it then in his eyes the way they didn't hold power anymore. Just wait. He had carried my silence as a favor to the system, but it had cost him. Maybe not in promotions, but in something deeper. Memory. That's what guilt feeds on. And maybe he knew that the only way to end it was to speak through the only language we shared, respect. So he used the one word no one else dared say, general. And when he said it, not as protocol, but as penance, he didn't just give me back my name. He gave the entire base a truth they could not unsee. He forced my father to stand there and witness the reckoning. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't felt in years. Vindication, not from medals, not from applause, but from acknowledgement. Vernon Tate knew what he did. And now, so did everyone else. It was supposed to be a quiet evening, just the four of us. No uniforms, no titles, no history, just dinner. Ryan thought it would help. He believed somehow that sharing a table again would rebuild something. Maybe it would have if we'd been 4 different people. The roast was dry, the wine untouched, the air thick. I barely said a word. Ryan filled the space with updates, his unit, his training schedule, his move to Virginia next month. I watched the clock tick on the wall behind him. Then he said it, casually, like it was nothing. I told command the file was falsified. They're opening an inquiry. Forks paused. My father looked up, calm, calculated. You did what he said. Ryan didn't blink. You heard me. You don't understand the consequences. No, Ryan said louder now, you don't understand what you did to her. My father's face didn't change, but something in his jaw tightened. It was a judgment call. Ryan leaned in. You ruined her record. You let someone else sign her name. You stood by while she disappeared from her own life. She wasn't fit for the field, he snapped. That was when I spoke, because I told the truth. He turned to me. For the first time that night, he looked directly at me. Because you destabilized the team. I saved them, I said. You embarrassed the command, he answered. Silence. Ryan sat back, shaking his head. You always cared more about perception than people. Across the table, my mother hadn't said a word. She stared at her plate, unmoving. Then she spoke. If I had said something that day, she said softly, he would have thrown me out of this house too. The words hit like shrapnel. She looked up at him, not at me. I wanted to defend her. I begged you to reconsider, but you made it clear. His eyes didn't waver. We do what's best for the family. She turned to me. I'm sorry, Trinity. I wasn't strong enough then. I nodded. But something inside me cracked, not from pain, but from recognition. I wasn't sitting with my family. I was sitting with 3 people who had built their peace atop my silence. And now their dinner had turned to dust. It was buried beneath blankets in an old cedar chest. My mother's handwriting on the envelope was unmistakable. March 14th, for tea, if ever. I almost didn't open it, but my name was on it, and the date March 14th was the day after I was discharged. Inside was a small cassette tape and a folded note. I recorded it. I couldn't send it. I'm sorry. I sat at the old kitchen desk, popped the tape into a dusty player, and pressed play. My mother's voice filled the room, shaky, breathless. "It's 11:32 p.m. You're asleep upstairs. I just got off the call with Henry, my father." I begged him. I told him the report was wrong, that you weren't unstable, that you saw something no one else saw. I heard a pause, her breath catching. He told me to let it go, that I didn't understand military politics, that if I pushed he'd question my loyalty. Another pause. "I'm scared. Not for me, for you, for what this will do to you. And I feel useless." I pressed pause. My hands shook. All these years I thought she stayed silent because she didn't care, because she agreed. But she was afraid. Not of him, of what her voice would cost us both. I let the tape play. "If you ever find this, Trinity, I hope you'll understand. I wanted to be brave. I wasn't. But I love you. I always have." Click. Silence. I sat there for a long time, not crying, just breathing. I hadn't been alone that night. She had tried in her way. And even though the tape never made it to the mailbox, it had finally found me. She was late, but not absent. The offer came a week after the salute, a quiet knock, a formal letter, an invitation to reinstate my rank retroactive. Medal ceremony press release included. I declined. Not because I didn't want it, but because it wasn't the point. I hadn't fought for a return. I fought for a reckoning. Instead, I offered something else. Consultation, discreetly, for cadets training in asymmetric threat scenarios. Division Echo vouched for me. Ryan made the introductions. Some knew who I was. Most didn't. That was fine. The truth didn't need a stage, just a ripple. Somewhere out there in a dusty simulation room, there'd be a young officer who didn't back down because someone once taught her that silence isn't always safe. That would be enough. The day Ryan transferred to a new unit, I found a folded piece of paper tucked inside my locker. His handwriting was unmistakable. It read, "The system didn't deserve you, but the truth still needed you." And I did too. "Thank you, Trin." There was no signature, just the words, but it said everything. He didn't need me to wear the title. He just needed to know I was still fighting, and now he knew. It arrived without warning. A small package, no return address. The envelope was thick-textured military issue but stripped of all insignia. No stamp, no formal delivery notice. Just placed quietly on the corner of my desk. Inside a black velvet box. And in it a silver badge. No name, no rank, no date. Just a matte-finished insignia. One not worn on a uniform, but meant to be kept. Hidden. Carried. At first I thought it was a mistake. But the enclosed note, handwritten, unsigned, said otherwise. Some truths don't wear medals. But they still deserve to exist. I held it in my hand for a long time. The weight wasn't physical. It was historical. This wasn't an award. It was an acknowledgement. A silent confession from a system that couldn't say it out loud. A system that had watched me burn and now couldn't quite bring itself to apologize, but wanted to mark the ashes anyway. For years I'd been trained to believe symbols mattered only when earned through public acts. This badge said otherwise. It said that sometimes the most dangerous acts of courage are the ones done in the dark. With no witnesses, no applause, only consequence. I didn't frame it. I didn't display it. I wrapped it in the same scarf I wore the night I left my last post. The night I realized truth had no uniform, it now rests in the top drawer of my desk, beside the original report, beside the tape my mother never sent, a drawer of things unspoken, but never forgotten. I don't wear the badge, I carry it. For those who never got one, for those still buried, and for the version of me who once thought silence was survival. It isn't, not anymore. When I left the base, there was no formation, no announcement, no send-off. I walked alone through the east corridor, my steps echoing faintly against concrete that had once memorized the cadence of 1,000 boots. No one stopped me, no one called out, no one said my name, and yet I felt them watching, not with hostility, not with pity, with understanding. Word had spread. About the salute, the tape, the badge that wasn't a badge. They didn't say it out loud, not yet. But the silence had changed. I heard whispers in passing. She's the one. The woman from Division Echo. The general who never got a uniform. The irony didn't escape me. All my life I had chased a name. Now I had become a legend. Because I let it go. They'll never put my face on a wall. Or teach my case at the academy. But in every unit I pass every new recruit who dares to raise a question. I see it. The ripple. And that's all I ever needed. Not recognition. Not redemption. Just a shift. The kind that outlives the whisper. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee? Or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel. Not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, we hope you carry this story with you, and remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story.